or the run rules on the diamond at Lowe's Field. We're giving you the breakdowns, the bets, and the hot takes from the perspective of two former OU Athletics employees. You're listening to the Mainline Podcast with Tyler Burton and Adam Jaquez.
Let's go! Let's go! Go!
Let's go. Welcome to the Main Line. I'm Adam Jaquez, joined as always by Tyler Burton. And tonight, a special guest, Brady Trantham from Through the Keyhole Pod. I'm sure everyone knows him. If you don't, we've got a lot of links in the show notes to follow Brady's work there. Brady, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, guys, what's up? Thank you for letting me jump on and invade and probably soil your podcast, but I'm going to do my best to kind of keep it all buttoned up. You guys do a wonderful job. One of the newer podcasts that I've been listening to over the last, like I told you, last few weeks. And you guys do an excellent job. Like the thing about OU podcasts is there are a lot of them. And I mean, I have one of the many of the lot of them. And usually what I try to look for is like, do certain podcasts just do something differently, slightly? You know, do they have different structures? Do they kind of handle themselves differently? You guys have your own little style, and you know, it's just right up there. So every time you guys put out a new show, I've been listening to it. So good on you all for putting out the good work.
So you're the one listener, Adam. We finally figured out who that guy is.
We found him.
Well, surely your parents listen to, or like some loved ones, friends, you know, because that's usually what happens. Is when I first started doing this, especially when I worked in the radio a few years ago, like God love her, my mom would every time I would just do a call in to talk about the Thunder, I just get a text, "Hey, sweetie, I heard you on the radio. You did such a good job." And it's like, okay, at least one person heard me.
There you go.
Well, Brady, we're excited. We're excited to have you on. We're not going to talk Bob Stoops. We're not going to talk kick six. We're not going to talk presidential election. That's been covered far and away by a lot of other sources. But yeah, excited to have you on tonight. You know, obviously Through the Keyhole, that's been something that I've been listening to, you know, for the last couple of years, all the way back to when, you know, Keegan was part of the show. And that's something because like you alluded to, you know, there's a lot of different contexts. There's a lot of different shows that are out there regarding OU football. I mean, we all know, you know, some of the more popular ones, obviously Through the Keyhole is right up there towards the top of the list. And I think that you guys also do a pretty good job of, you know, continuing to pump out new and creative different types of content that you don't find on social media. You don't find, you know, a lot of the main talking heads putting out there each and every week. So it's a nice breath of fresh air every time I see one of those pop up in the feed each and every week. But yeah, let's just kind of dive right into it, Adam, because obviously, you know, we're 37 days away from kickoff. Fall camp gets underway here in about a week's time. And really just kind of the first thing that we wanted to chat with you about here, Brady, is obviously just getting your thoughts on Brent Venables through the first 2 years. Obviously, making the transition from Clemson, coming back to Norman, you know, not just, you know, running the defense, but he's now the head ball coach. You know, what was a disappointing 6-7 year in 2022. He follows that up with a 10-win season a year ago. Happy with where we're at? Is this kind of the, you know, where is Brent Venables? How is he measured up in your eyes for the first 2 years going into the SEC now?
Well, first of all, thank you for listening to the show for, you know, a few years. I'm glad that we've been able to keep you interested. So I truly appreciate that. It has been going for a while. We've had different hosts, and so like with different people, it's going to change differently. But I'm glad to hear that we've retained some people. So thank you for that. But for Brent, I couldn't be happier with Brent Venables. Having said that, and we'll get to this, I'm sure, like we're going to find out a lot of things this year. But to kind of unpack the question, he went 6-7. Like he has to wear that. And trust me, everybody has reminded him of that, because anybody that wants to talk about Oklahoma, about their outlook for 2024, or just kind of like the state of the program, everybody will say, hey, they went 6-7 2 years ago. I mean, even though like Sark had a worse first year at Texas, and then people like the heavens opened up and they go 8-4, and it's finally, they look like a normal football team. So let's just forget that they didn't go to a bowl game last year, and like, who cares? Like, I get why all these things happen, but yeah, Brent has to wear 6-7. But to me, like that had to happen. Now, when we were going 6-7, I was not happy week to week. You know, it was very frustrating to watch very winnable game turn into a loss because of one bad decision or one bad play, or, you know, this guy just isn't an OU caliber player. God love him, Justin Broyles. He's just letting a dude just get a catch over the middle over and over and over again. These things happen. But as a program, OU needed something like that, because for far too long, they had just been getting away with not addressing the issues that Brent had to address. And it's not just the defense. It's just the overall kind of vibe of the program of, well, this is good enough. Like, we have all these cool athletes on offense. We typically have one of the best, if not the best quarterback in the country. And we play in a conference that you can get away with that. We can win the majority of these games. And for the most part, we can win this conference. And that's cool in the short term. But once you get to the big stage, and as OU fans, as OU people, we expect to be on that big stage fairly consistently. But what we don't expect is to go into those games and feel like, yeah, we don't have a shot in hell on this. So that needed to change. That needed to be fixed. And unfortunately, when you have to address something like that, sometimes bad things happen. And the result was you go 6-7 in your first year. And, I remember immediately after the end of the Cheez-It Bowl, I think I tweeted this out because I was mad. I was just mad that, God, a seventh game where it followed basically the same script of, like, we had this game won, and one play leads to another, and then you find yourselves, looking at a loss. And I remember thinking, like, you don't fool yourselves into thinking, oh, we lost 4 games by a combined score of like 10 points. Like, that could flip. I'm like, that's fine. But, there are some bigger things at play here. And at the time, my whole question was, is OU and is Brent Venables going to be able to continue recruiting at the level that he did, like right when he got to OU and brought in the 10th or the 9th ranked class in the country? And of course, he answered that question very quickly and brought in an even better class, which then made me start kind of rolling back my initial thought as after the season ended. And I thought, you know what, maybe if he just simply replaces some of these players that, they just, a typical good OU team, offense, defense, like some of these guys probably wouldn't be on the 2 deep, but they're a starter for this team for one reason or the other. If he simply replaces them with better players, and some of the players like a Danny Stutzman, who are actually fairly talented, another year in the system, maybe OU can find themselves on the fortunate end of some of these 1-score games. And that didn't really come to fruition because OU is still kind of struggling with one-score games, and we'll get to that, I'm sure, later. But OU is on the fortunate side in that they were able to really take advantage of more talent, more competitive depth, and guys that were in the program under Brent for at least 2 years in that second year showed that, okay, like we know how to do this now. We're not like second guessing ourselves. We're confident in what we're doing, and we're OU, so we probably have more talent than you, Big 12 team. And that's what we saw play out in year 2. So you add the SEC factor to that. Yes, we're going to learn a lot. And with Brent Venables, even though a lot of that first year, there are some things I don't necessarily blame him for, but there are some things like some game time decisions, in the moment decisions, in the moment processes that we'll find out a lot more this year, because every game is going to hold so much more gravity than it previously did in the Big 12. We'll find out things, but I just don't see how you can be an OU fan and not be satisfied. You can have questions, but I don't see how you can be an OU fan and not be satisfied with what Brent has done off the field and on the field.
Go ahead, Tyler.
Yeah,
I know you had
no. Well, I was just going to say, Brady, I think you make a good point, and I don't think that Oklahoma fans really fully understood what Brent Venables was walking into. We talk about, Oklahoma being complacent to where, being able to score 50 points a game, even though you're going to give up 35 to 40 during the Lincoln Riley era, that was okay, just simply because you had the high-powered offense, one of the best in the country. So you could afford to do that and have those deficiencies on defense just simply because you could outscore the opponent. Fast forward to, LSU in the Peach Bowl, Georgia in the Rose Bowl, Alabama, down there in Miami. That's really when, kind of the state of the program and the way that the recruiting has been, the brand of football being played on the defensive side of the football. That's where we were kind of exposed as a program. And I think that that's something that Brent Venables, and we've talked about it, numerous times on this podcast over the last couple of seasons, that if it's going to take a 6-7 type year for Brent Venables to be able to hit the reset button on the program, whether it's, building the right culture, recruiting the right way. And make no mistake about it, Lincoln Riley, he had top 10 recruiting classes, but it was also kind of skewed in a fact where you had the 5-star quarterback, you had a couple of 5-star wide receivers. So that kind of made up for, lack of attention being put on other positions on the football team. And it's nice to see that Brent Venables and this coaching staff over the last couple of seasons, they're kind of spreading the wealth a little bit. You're starting to see these blue chip guys, at all 22 different positions. Maybe outside of offensive line, which we can touch on that here in a little bit if we want to. But it is nice to see, Brent Venables, despite the fact that he is, 16-10 right now through the first 2 years. I was talking about it with Adam after, watching his press conference at SEC Media Days. I couldn't be more thankful and happy that this is the guy leading this program into the SEC this year. So this is going to be a huge, learning experience for Oklahoma, both from a fan base standpoint, but also for the program as well. And we'll see how these guys do.
Brady, I want to ask you, and I don't want to steal your thunder because you guys talked about this on the Keyhole Pod yesterday, but you talk about, and you don't have to totally unpack this, but you talked about how there's kind of a baseline expectation of here's the 8 games that you should win, the opponents that you should beat. But I'm curious more of, just talking playoffs. And that's kind of our thumbnail for those watching on YouTube is, in order for Oklahoma to make the playoffs, I think 10-2 is a pretty safe, no matter who you beat, who you lose to, that 10-2 probably gets you in the playoffs. I'm curious more about that 9-3 because that feels much more attainable, obviously. Is there anyone on the schedule that you think Oklahoma has to beat this team or can't lose to that team with a 9-3 record in order to make the playoffs? Obviously, we don't know what the rest of the field would look like, but kind of a tough question there. But is there anything on that schedule that you're like, yeah, that's a must win or a can't lose type of situation?
Yeah, I think if you're trying to talk yourself into a situation where what's the simplest way OU gets into the playoff? I mean, obviously the more difficult way would be to win more games. So you're talking about OU going 10-2 or 11-1. That would be more difficult because this schedule is very, very tough. So the easiest way would be maybe a 9-3 team from the SEC can find themselves looking into the playoff. And the easiest answer for that without, like truly unpacking it would be, you've got to beat Alabama, or like you've got to go into the Alabama and LSU portion of your schedule where you have 2 losses, because then like the stakes are higher. People are going to be paying attention. The games are going to have much more gravity. And if you beat Alabama at home, you could probably find yourself in a situation where, man, like OU's essentially clinched a playoff with 9 wins and they're going on the road to Death Valley with a chance to win 10. And if they do that, they will secure it even more. But hell, they could rest some of their starters, like they're basically in right now, and they don't need to waste their time like stressing about the game next week. Now, that's an obviously an ideal situation. So many other things have to happen. Like the groundwork has to be set for them outside of what they can control. But if you find yourself in that situation, that would be the easiest way. But you also just kind of have the factor of who you beat, when you beat them, really matters, because obviously like there have been times where OU has lost to Texas and still made it to a playoff. And it was a different conference, different format, a lot of different factors. But the main thing is that the Texas game is somewhat still early in the year and a lot of football happens afterwards. So you can lose early, but if you win late and you kind of find yourself among like the kind of the last few teams looking into the dance, mm-hmm. If you get that big win against Alabama, or if you get a big win on the road against a tough LSU team in that environment, and OU at the end after the dust settles is a 9-3 team, it'd be hard to kind of leave them out if that were the case.
Brady, I think that a big talking point for us has been kind of redefining expectations, both for Oklahoma, but also for this fan base going into year 1 of the SEC. Now, I know that if you listen to some Oklahoma fans and most of the national media, they think that Oklahoma is going to just go in there and get their ass whooped this upcoming season, and they're just going to turn into the Nebraska of the SEC.
Nebraska, yeah.
Nebraska. But I think that when you talk about expectations, and I'm kind of leaning more on the side of the fence that I think that it's a better chance that Oklahoma hits that 7-5 number than they do 9-3. Now, obviously, we'll see how this thing plays out over the first couple of seasons. There's obviously a few different things that kind of play into why I think the way that they do, the offensive line being one of them, just because there's so much uncertainty at this point right now. But Do you think that Oklahoma fans, are we fully grasping how big of a change this is going to be, both from like a game day atmosphere standpoint, but basically the biggest thing for me is the daunting schedule, week in and week out, having to go on the road to Oxford, having Alabama come in. Then you got to go to Baton Rouge. Oh, by the way, you got to go to Columbia, and Josh Heupel and Nico coming to Oklahoma as well. So do you think that the overall pulse of this fan base, are we in the right frame of mind going into this, or do you think that people just think that it's Oklahoma? We're a 10-win team, each and every year for the most part. This is going to be no different.
I try to make a point every once in a while on Through the Keyhole of like, hey, I host a podcast, but I don't speak for the fans. I've never thought of myself, even when I did radio, I never thought of myself as like, I speak for OU fans. You should feel this way. I don't ever really want to tell people how to fan, but I will say the fans who basically expect national title every year or 11, 12 wins a year, no matter what, you're just setting yourself up to be disappointed. Like I had to be, I started being an OU fan when I was 9, and that coincided with the 99 season. So lucky me. But it took me just, until I was about 14 or 15. So you're talking after USC destroyed us in the Orange Bowl for the national title, after the following season where OU had a bunch of freshmen and Rhett Bomar was the quarterback. It took me that long to kind of realize, okay, to expect a national title every year is pretty silly. You need to go into the season with different expectations because every team is different. You're going to have more experience. You're going to have less experience. You're going to have like an awesome can't miss, quarterback talent, or you're going to have a guy who you just don't know. Or you're going to have a situation like this year where we're all excited about Jackson Arnold, but we have no idea how he's going to handle the game-to-game process of being QB1 at OU, let alone in the SEC. If it was the Big 12, I think we'd have like a better idea of like, yeah, like we don't know if he's going to be Sam Bradford, but this is a very manageable schedule. He should be fine unless he's just destined to be bad. But I don't think anyone's thinking that. So to those who are going into the season just expecting like going guns a-blazing and we're ready for the SEC and they ain't ready for us, I respect the confidence. Even if we had Texas' schedule, a much on paper softer schedule, I would still like really caution extreme optimism of like going into the conference year one and getting to the SEC title game, because it's different. I think OU in the SEC, I think it fares better because, one of the things we talked about on Keyhole a bunch is just the Big 12 just kind of lulls you if you are Oklahoma and you are the king of the conference and you have the most talent week in and week out, except for for the most part, Texas. Because for the most part, it was always, is the team going to be motivated today? Are they going to take this opponent seriously? Are they not going to look ahead? Are they hungover from the big emotional win against Texas? It was rarely ever, man, that Big 12 team just straight up beat OU. Like they were just straight up better. It was usually because tomfoolery happened. Like Iowa State in 2020, Theo Weiss drops like 2 in his hands touchdown passes. And the defense had, I think, 4 or 5 drive extending penalties on 3rd or 4th down. So it's just all this nonsense has to occur on the road just for this other Big 12 team to barely beat OU. And that was always the case for the most part. And yes, there were times where OU just got straight up beat, but it's sports. Sometimes things like that happen. In the SEC. Every team is going to have OU's attention, and OU's going to have all their opponents' attention. And it's going to come down to, do your players outplay these other players who are all just as good as you?
Yep.
And I think that fares better for OU in the long run. Now, in the short term, when you look at that schedule, it's like, when you say that, 7-5 is a little bit closer in your opinion than a 9-3 or a 10-2, I would agree, because I'm thinking 8-4. And that to me would be like a job well done. Everybody pat yourself on the back. Yes. Each of those 4 losses, I will be pissed off, Saturday night and say be drunk with my friends and say, fire this guy. And this guy, I don't like this anymore. But then Sunday, Monday rolls around. I'm just like, I don't care. Let's keep going. You go 8-4 in year one in the SEC with a lot of question marks on offense at QB and the offensive line. You feel really good about yourself. You could top it off with a nice bowl win.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, with
some
a
good
second,
momentum.
Yeah, good momentum with a second year Jackson Arnold in 2025, not as many question marks on offense, and a proven system of development on defense, despite losing a lot of good players like Billy Bowman and Danny Stutzman, probably Dominic Williams as well. You go 8-4 in the SEC in year one, you're looking at a preseason top 5, at the very least top 10 for 2025, if that's the case.
Well, I think the crazy part about it too, Adam, and you can get to your question here, but if Oklahoma goes 8-4 this season, I think that an argument could be made that if Jackson Arnold is the type of talent and can play the way that we think he's capable of doing, the offensive line comes together, this could be the most complete Oklahoma football team in quite some time that we've seen. And even if you go 8-4, I don't think that that's an indictment on, the current state of the program, or, how bad of a job, Brent Venables only winning 8 games. That's unacceptable here in Norman, Oklahoma. But I think that just kind of speaks to the severity of how tough the schedule is and how tough, the opponents are going to be each and every week. So even if you go 8-4, obviously, depending on how, the season plays out, that's a damn good year for Oklahoma in year one. Like you alluded to, Brady, when talking about the uncertainties, what I call it, what's going to be a true freshman quarterback going into this season, replacing all 5 offensive line. Yeah, there's more than just simply saying that 8-4 or 10-2, that's just going to be the end all be all. That's going to form my opinion on how successful of a year this is going to be.
Yeah, and I think too, like not just this year, but looking forward into future years, I think OU fans probably are redefining a lot in terms of expectations. And I know we talked a few weeks ago about how Stuart Mandel wrote the article that OU is worse off in the SEC because they won't win conference championships at the same rate that they're doing that. And my argument is I don't think it's actually that great of a thing to win the SEC anymore because
will that matter? Does anyone care about that anymore?
I feel like no, because if you are the 3rd place SEC team, then you get a bye week during championship week. Then you play the number 12 team in the playoff, who is probably the group of 5 team at your home stadium. And so I don't know, it kind of works out relatively easy rather than having to go to Atlanta and play Alabama or Georgia or whoever it might be. It almost is like, who cares what that is? Just get in the playoff.
The only people that will care will be the fans of the schools who did not win, because, let's just say ideally, like OU 9-3 gets into the, obviously not getting to the SEC title game, but gets to the playoff. And they miraculously, like team of destiny, win a national title. They're going to be like Texas or Georgia fans. Like, let's say Texas and Georgia make the SEC title game. They're going to be Texas and Georgia fans that offseason going, you guys didn't make the SEC title game. It's just like, who cares? Like, we won we are the best team in the country. Nobody cares about the conference title games anymore. I hope at some point it goes away, because it's a waste of time. You're going to see opt-outs for conference title games, which that would be just an absolute blaspheming of the sport of college football if that's the case. And also, I don't want to see players get hurt in a game that's otherwise meaningless. So hopefully that goes away.
I feel like they need to do 3 versus 4 in a kind of a wild card game, like a
play-in like the NBA. That would be fun.
Yeah, make it more interesting. Reward the top 2 teams. Give your bye to the number 1 overall team. Although I think we're about to see like a whole litany of weird tiebreaker scenarios with these 16-team conferences where the schedules are so unbalanced. Like it's just going to be a mess, I think, at some point. And then we'll eventually work our way back into these regional conferences that are like 8 to 10 teams anyway. But Tyler, I know I went a little off the list there of the topics, and but I thought it related really well to that whole point of just like winning a conference championship is just not the same as what it used to be. So.
I mean, you still had a better monologue right there than the UCLA head coach did today. I don't know if anybody had a chance to check that out. My God,
that was both cool and sad. Like I'm like, he's either like really badass and just like, this is silly. Like, why do we have to come up here and talk?
Just doesn't give a shit.
But it was very clear that he was just very uncomfortable, and it looked like a comedian bombing. So it was like, I don't want to watch.
He must have been trying to think of like what UCLA's value is to the Big Ten and just couldn't think of anything. That had to be what it was.
He was like, well, we're oh God, Iowa does that. Actually, back in the 80s, so was Michigan. Beaches. USC is also here. Guys, you got me. I don't know.
Yeah, Lincoln Riley, the gift that keeps on giving. He has some real doozies coming out of Big Ten Media Days today. But
Dude's a dork, man.
dork. Brady, let's talk offensive line here. And I know that you guys have had your fair share of conversations about this position group on Through the Keyhole, and you will continue to do so as we move to the last 4 to 5 weeks before this thing gets kicked off here at the end of August. But one of the things that's been brought up on this podcast that we've talked about, and again, could be the key difference between, a 7-5 or a 9-3, 10-2 type season for Oklahoma, is how well Bill Bedenbaugh has the ability to get this offensive line to be able to gel. And one of the things that he's not going to be afforded to do this year, outside of, having one premier opponent on his schedule in the University of Texas, and you can pretty much throw any lineup out there and be able to win the Big 12. But I think that one of the things that has been a luxury for Bill Bedenbaugh is he's had 5 to 6 weeks at the beginning of each season to be able to figure out who his starting five is, who that 6-7 man rotation is going to be. And as long as you've got that group, playing, gelled and, playing good cohesion football by Texas, then you're in good shape. You're not afforded that luxury anymore. You got Tennessee coming in week 4. Then you got to go to Auburn. Then you've got Texas. What are your thoughts on Bill Bedenbaugh and, kind of projecting what this offensive line could potentially look like this year?
Yeah, this has been something that I've been, I guess, just ranting about because, it's fairly simple. This isn't the Big 12. You can't figure out your offensive line. It can't take you half the season to figure it out. You got to know who your starting five are, or you have to have a very good idea. And any type of platooning you want to do, you do it in situations where you can afford to do so because you want to save the main starting five for the meat of the schedule. Something like last year, that does not need to occur this season, because if that happens, you could be staring at an 0-2 conference schedule, as you start off your, first year in the SEC. But having said that, typically the reason why OU fans will say hold that off until Texas, or they need to figure it out until Texas. It's because it's the biggest game of the regular season. It's the big rivalry game. Typically it can kind of dictate conference standings and national title standings back in the 2000s. There are all those reasons. One of the pragmatic reasons is it's usually the 5th, 6th game of the year, meaning that you've put 5 or 6 games of film out there for every opposing coaching staff to watch. And it's usually against Texas where the things that OU would get away with, in those first 4 or 5 games, Texas would take advantage of it. And the easiest example I can think of, and I was trying to look up the name because I can never remember this guy's name, but he was Farnock, that big offensive lineman that played on the 2015 team. And he was the guy who, I think somebody from Texas, some player mentioned that he tipped us off every play pre-snap. Because
Josiah St. John.
Josiah St. John.
St. John. Okay. Yeah. He tipped us off every play pre-snap because of his stance. And we knew it was a pass or run. And if you remember that 2015 game, the offense couldn't do anything. It was so random how bad the offense was that day. Part of it was Lincoln Riley forgot that he had P. Ryan and Joe Mixon, but that kind of happened a handful of times. But things like that can occur simply because at that point of the season, you've put enough stuff on tape that guys can see your tendencies. So part of it is you don't want to feel your way around on the offensive line, but the other part is you can only go so far in the season by tinkering, because you're going to have enough stuff on film that people are going to find a tendency or two and use it against you. I think I want to believe that Bill kind of knows who his guys are right now. I feel like he had a good idea after spring, even knowing that, Troy Everett might be, he might miss a few games, but I think the initial prognosis was definitely out for spring, fall camp, but I don't think anybody predicted that he was going to be out for a significant chunk of the season. So if you're getting Hickman via the portal from SMU, and you've got Troy Everett kind of waiting in the wings, getting healthy, and that can be a good depth piece as a backup center, as a backup guard, or as a starting guard. Mm-hmm. I think that makes you feel a lot better, especially considering all the rave reviews Fevechi Wee-Woo's got from North Texas, the transfer. I think we're all very satisfied with Jacob Sexton. And you're just basically looking for one or two extra guys. And as frustrating as Bill Bedenbaugh, the recruiter, is to me, But hey, maybe that might change in the next few days, few weeks. We might get some good news. But as frustrating as he is as a recruiter, I mean, I got to defer to his ability to coach and develop because like there's too much evidence to support that he'll figure it out.
You might go back to the offensive line with this next one, but let's take quarterback off the table. That's the obvious one. We've talked a lot about depth. Is there a position group that you think, still needs more depth there? That's kind of the area that I don't want to see any injuries because I'm not confident in what's in the second and third string.
Yeah, you could have kept O-line and quarterback like available, and I still would have said defensive line because, I mean, real quick, if your starting quarterback gets hurt, your expectations just go straight down no matter what. Like, no matter what. Now, unless Michael Hawkins is destined by God to be like awesome, which could very well happen. But usually if your starting QB goes down, it's like 2009 vibes of like, yep, season's over. Here comes Landry Jones. But I truly think it's defensive line because as it's slotted right now, i.e. as everybody is healthy, as we begin fall camp and knock on wood, everybody continues to be healthy. I think OU has a good enough defensive line to handle the SEC and to wreak havoc and to help like guys like Stutzman, Kip Lewis Carter. If Jaron, if Kanik has made a jump, even a guy like him to wreak havoc defensively. The problem is if one guy gets hurt, especially a starter, if one guy gets hurt, then you're asking an 18-year-old true freshman to like, all right, go fight the SEC now. It's like, that would start a snowball of like, hey, if you find yourself beating Tennessee and getting a good win against Auburn, but you lose DeJoun Terry, oh boy, you're at that point you're 5-0 and you got a bye week going into Texas, and you might be able to like stave off like a Texas game, maybe South Carolina, but if you're depending on Jaden Jackson, who I'm excited for, and I think he's going to be great, but an 18-year-old to just handle that pressure and handle that responsibility week in and week out in the best conference in the country, there's a freshman wall for a reason. And unless you are Adrian Peterson, most people hit it. And if your starting interior defensive lineman is hitting it midway through the season in the SEC, that's not a formula for success. So to me, the defensive line is good, especially on paper, but I think pragmatically on the field, I think they all match up fairly well, but God, they've got to stay healthy. So you're asking guys like R. Mason Thomas, who's never been healthy consistently in his career, to be healthy. You're asking a guy like you're asking two linemen like Dominic Williams and DeJoun Terry to play extremely well, but please don't get hurt at all. Do not miss any time, because we're excited for Grayson Halton. We're excited for David Stone and Jaden Jackson, but I don't know if they're ready for that just yet. Maybe they are, maybe I'm wrong, but I would just err on the side of like turn off injuries on the defensive line. Everything else can be normal, I guess.
Brady, in 2017, flipping it over to the offensive side of the ball, in 2017, we saw 8 touchdown receptions by running backs, but only 6 have come in the last 6 years since then. Do you foresee this?
That's a good stat.
That's a good little tidbit there, Adam. Now that Seth Littrell and Joe John Finley have kind of taken things over for Jeff Lebby, hopefully there's not near the amount of jet sweeps. We'll leave that be. But do you foresee this being more utilized, considering the offensive line is what it is? Whether it's the screen game, the quick passing game, and is Gavin Sawchuk the best option to kind of get us back to that offensive standpoint where we're utilizing the same way we did with DeMarco Murray and Joe Mixon and Rodney Anderson, where people are catching the ball out of the backfield, that being another tool in the belt that Seth Littrell has the ability to play with?
Yeah, speaking of guys who have never been consistently healthy during their times at OU, Gavin Sawchuk. Obviously, if he's healthy, and this is something Matt Burton and I have been talking about on Keyhole, of how is Gavin Sawchuk not on anyone's short list as one of the better backs in the SEC? Like when he's been able to play, he's been awesome for OU standards, which means something. And yet no one cares to mention him or like just thinks he's mid, I guess, but whatever. If he's healthy, obviously that helps out the offense. It helps out Jackson Arnold. It helps out Seth Littrell, makes his life easier. My whole thought on Littrell as the offensive coordinator is, if you want to go back and look at his time at UNC, if you want to go back and look at his time at North Texas, I'll watch that and think, I'm not going to marry myself to anything because he's dealing with a different type of athlete at OU especially than what he had at North Texas. And, all due respect to North Carolina, different type of athlete than what he was dealing with at Chapel Hill. So, whatever tendencies you might find by watching film of him from those two schools, I want to believe if there are some things that you think, I hope that doesn't happen. I'm not going to assume it will. If you think that he is stubborn in the running game for whatever reason, well, maybe he had to do that out of necessity at North Texas. If you think that he had a problem with being a little too funky with the passing game, maybe he had to do that, out of necessity. We're going to find out a lot about Seth Littrell because, he's been a head coach. He never really obviously didn't take that step to like a higher level program to lead that team. North Carolina is a Power 5 school, and they've had a solid program, over the last 15 years. They've always put out some good talent into the NFL, like relatively for a basketball school. But this is a much different platform for him as a coach, as a play caller, as an everything. So we're going to find out a lot. With Lebby, it was a little bit more of an understanding of what you were going to get because he had been at Ole Miss, he had been at Baylor. You kind of knew what you were getting, and everybody had their opinion when Jeff Lebby got hired. I certainly did. I understood why it had to happen, and it wasn't terrible. Like I'll give him that credit. Like it wasn't terrible, but there were some things that I knew going into that experience that I don't like this for the offense. And one of those things was like tempo for tempo's sake. With Littrell, I'm kind of going into it blind. So I guess I don't really have any good answers for you other than anything you might watch as an OU fan. If you're bored and you watch North Texas tape from with Littrell or North Carolina, like what you like. But if you hate something, just be optimistic and think, well, maybe with better talent, a better quarterback. I mean, the best QB he ever had was Mason Fine, right? I think Jackson Hall is probably a little bit better than Mason Fine.
Yeah. Probably didn't have a Deion Burks up there in Denton.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So with a better crop of talent, maybe he'll be more fully realized as an offensive coordinator. And just, to me, it would just come down to just do the smart thing, do the easy thing if it's there, and just don't try to be the smartest guy in the room. We've had, since 2015, we've had that experience. So like, I just want to do away with that. If Littrell can do that, I'll be happy.
When you talk about the talent differential, that's something that you guys talked about a week ago on the Keyhole Pod. So there's 2 Keyhole Pods that everyone should go listen to. But you guys talked about it specifically in terms of, okay, in the Big 12, OU had better talent. So other teams' offenses would come in, they do motions, they do formation shifts and just weird gimmicky type stuff. And I thought of that and I was like, okay, now Oklahoma's going to go to the SEC. And I think the point you guys were making was, okay, Auburn's not going to do all that weird stuff that Kansas was doing because they think they have the same level of talent that they do at Oklahoma. My thought was like, okay, well, Oklahoma's going to go up offensively against these teams. We know we have an offensive line that is kind of a mystery. Do you think that Seth Littrell might use, or should he use, even some of those same tactics offensively in OU's favor?
I tend to think so, just because, and this might be a silly reason, but it's year one in the SEC, and we're new to them. They are new to us. So you might as well take advantage of that and just, throw everything in the kitchen sink at it, because nobody's really expecting national title for OU. No one's really expecting, 10 or 11 wins. So this is a very unique situation for any coach at OU, where you're kind of playing with house money, knowing full well that the reason why people aren't expecting that is because your schedule is very hard. So it's not like you're necessarily playing with house money, but hey, like, they're not expecting us to do much at the end of the year. But if we just win 8 or 9 or 8 games, which fairly manageable even with the schedule, relatively speaking, then people will be very happy with us. So let me try this. Let's do this. Let's keep the offense engaged. Let's reward the offensive line. Just do things like that. Like when I played football, the offensive line always loved when we would run flea flicker. They'd love when we would run trick plays, because they could see the look in the defensive lineman or the linebacker's eyes of like, oh God, I wasn't ready for this. And you could always get kind of a cheap shot, an easy hit on somebody. So I think that'd be an easy anecdote for an offense that is clearly going to be figuring itself out the first few weeks, if not the first month and a half or so of the season, with a new offensive coordinator, new conference, new attitude. Like, it would make sense. Now, if it's 4th and inches and they run a jet sweep, I mean, I might be in the market for a new TV.
Yeah. There you go. Well, Brady, I got 2 more fun ones here, then we'll get you out of here. And obviously, we're here with Brady Trantham for the Keyhole. Appreciate your time tonight, Brady. Let's do a couple fun ones here. Going into this season, if you could pick one player from the past, maybe so, we'll say since Bob got there in 99 and 2000, if you could pick one former player from the last 24 years to add to this team going into year 1 of the SEC, who are you going with?
Trent Williams. He's the best player in the NFL, or basically still is.
There you go.
If you had a top 3 overall or top 5 overall pick in the NFL draft on your offensive line in the SEC, I'd be like, yeah, Jackson Arnold's going to be fine.
Yeah, makes things a little bit easier for everybody involved.
Yeah. Maybe another answer could be like Tommy Harris, Gerald McCoy. Those are kind of easy ones because it's the SEC. This is where all the defensive linemen are. Adrian Peterson would be fun, in the SEC. But you can even go a little weird with it. How about those 6 games of Jazz Reynolds in 2011? Like when he had all the one-handed catches? That would be fun. But we've already got a tall guy at receiver, a few of them, so might be redundant.
Okay. I don't need jazz hands. I don't need jazz hands back. I'm good.
That was early Twitter. It was fun.
Oh my God. That's when that was the best time. Brady, last one for me. Going down the list of Oklahoma's schedule this year, some of the marquee games, obviously Tennessee coming in on September 21st. You got to go to Jordan-Hare, Texas at Red River. You got to make sure out to the Grove for Oxford, Columbia, Missouri, and what's going to be an absolute hornet's nest. And then, oh, by the way, you close things out with Alabama at home and Death Valley at night on the road, most likely. But Brady Trantham sitting here with his magic wand. If you could guarantee one win, if you could pick one game this season that Oklahoma is definitively going to win this one and win it dominantly, who are you picking?
Is the easy answer Texas, or can you at least do me a solid and just say you can't include Texas? Texas is off the board.
Yeah, can't do Texas, and I'll narrow it down here. We'll say Ole Miss, Missouri, Bama, and LSU.
Yeah, can't pick Maine.
Can't pick Maine.
So the games that I can pick are Missouri, Ole Miss, Alabama.
LSU.
This is probably wrong. I want it to be Missouri. I want to.
I'm the exact same way.
I want to throw them in the locker so bad. Like my man, who are you and why are you talking to me? Is usually the attitude I have when I see Missouri fans chirping on social media. It's like, look, I get it. It's cute. You guys have beat OU for a few players that we really wanted, and even going back to Luther Burden, he was a player that I think was verbally committed to Lincoln Riley and OU before he flipped to Missouri at the last second, which was, something that would become it's called foreshadowing in the storytelling world. That would happen a lot under Lincoln Riley. Williams Nwaneri as well. You get Caden Green via some tomfoolery in the transfer portal. And then they win 11 games with a schedule reminiscent of a random OU schedule in the Big 12, just very soft, like 2016 OU Big 12 schedule. And all of a sudden they think, oh yeah, we're on the same playing field as you. It's like, my man, Missouri has a history of every once in a while getting really good players and getting them from OU, like Jeremy Maclin. Maclin didn't want to play on the same roster with Malcolm Kelly and Joaquin Iglesias, Quentin Chaney, Manuel Johnson, like all those guys. So he went to Missouri to go be a star, and it was the right choice. Unfortunately for him, he never beat OU, and he had a handful of chances to do so, and he never really did anything. So Luther Burden, that's cute. He's going to be really good in the NFL, just like Maclin was. And Theo Weiss, we all remember him. Sorry. It's in Columbia. It's a stadium that OU's won, I don't know, 30 or 40 of the 40 times they've played there. Mm-hmm. Cool. You've been in the SEC for 10 years. What have you done? Now you care? okay, all right, I guess this is your one little window of time to do something. And I guess it inflates their value to like chirp at OU, because then it gets some OU fans to respond. They're like, oh my God, we're on the same level as them, guys. We can do this. And it would just be so beautiful to just unleash hell on them and beat them like 52-10. And just like, all right, you're Missouri again. Bye-bye. See you later.
I think that's a great place to end it. You can follow Brady on Twitter. His Twitter handle's linked in our show notes, both on YouTube and the podcast, as well as the Keyhole Pods page as well. We've got the Patreon linked on there. We've got the Keyhole Pod website linked on there. But Brady, let everyone know who's not familiar with Keyhole Pod. Like, what are you guys doing over there? And where can everyone find you?
Yeah, so we've got a few things. So we've got a free website, keyholepod.com. You can find one of our 4 co-hosts. We've got 4 hosts, myself, Matt Burton from 107.7 The Franchise in Oklahoma City, Peyton Guthrie, and who's is it like Woody? That's not his handle. That's his. I always forget.
That's how it comes up when he retweets something.
Is it Peyton Glenn? See, and now I'm a bad host. It is. Yeah, it's at Peyton Glenn, Peyton with an A and GLEN on Twitter. And then Alan Kenny, also known as Blatant Homerism. Our website, Keyhole Pod, you can find a lot of Alan's writings on there. He just wrote his kind of final musings from SEC Media Day a few days ago. And then we have a Patreon page, which is kind of the bridge to extra podcasts, extra writing. Like I put out a Monday post every week. We'll usually have an extra podcast with a special guest. You know, Peyton's been kicking ass with getting a bunch of SEC personalities that cover their respective teams to come on and talk about the outlook and then how they feel about OU joining the SEC. So patreon.com/through the keyhole. I think our Twitter account is at Keyhole Pod, but yeah, we put out a free podcast for everybody, obviously every Tuesday. And once the season starts, I think we'll go back to the format of, a Monday or a Tuesday pod. Whenever Brent has his press conference, that's like that later that day, we'll record that week's show. We might do like a shorter kind of like pregame podcast, like a few days before, like we used to. And then we always do like the post-game rant podcast exclusively on Patreon, where I get to scream a lot. But I don't anticipate screaming that much, because it's just going to be, this is all fun, guys. Like, it's the SEC, the game is going to be much bigger. And if you win close, unlike in the Big 12, I don't anticipate myself being angry. It's like, we won, great, move on. And if you lose, it's just like, hey, like we knew it was going to be hard. We just need to get a little bit better, and we're OU probably will. So I don't anticipate me getting too angry on these podcasts, but if those losses accumulate, like, yeah, that's when I'll be a little bit more unfiltered.
And that's when the content is at an all-time high.
I hope so.
Pure entertainment value.
You said you've been listening to Keyhole since Keegan, so
there's been some doozies.
I apologize for my behavior in that window of time.
Hey, it keeps us coming back for more. It's the best part. So, well, Brady, again, we can't thank you enough for coming on, spending some time with us tonight. Obviously, like we said, 37 days away from kickoff, Friday night, August 30th against Temple. You are more than welcome to come back on here and join us anytime. And again, everybody check out Through the Keyhole. Fantastic stuff that the guys are doing over there. Tremendous content, especially when the season kicks off. It's definitely, if you're an Oklahoma fan, if you're a true diehard, that's one of the things that you want to add into your weekly rotation. So, Adam, get us out of here.
Absolutely. Thanks, Brady, for joining us. Thanks, everyone, for watching on YouTube or listening to the podcast, wherever you are. We'll see you next week for the next episode of The Main Line.